Coach Leipold just mentioned that a few days ago was the first time that Jalen and the top three wide receivers had all been practicing in full at the same time. Just what was it like kind of having them all out there and getting to see what a preview of what the offense could actually
Fun. Fun to watch. Yeah. You've had one guy out here for a couple of days, another guy back, then another guy out a little bit. So to see all of them doing their thing together is a lot of fun. And, between the things that Coach Z, T-Sam, myself are trying to do with those guys, I think they have so much experience, and they have not only experience, but experience together. And there's a chemistry there that you want to allow to show up on the field. And so the way I say it is, you got to be yourself, and like I talked to these guys about allowing them to have their own personality on the field within the structure of a system. But I'll be honest with you, we're giving a little bit more freedom to those guys than what I would normally do, just because I trust them so much. And great instincts typically just do the thing that they should do based on the coverage that they see, and somehow they get open, and Jalen just makes it work.
Calvin Clements was a guy who's committed to you guys at Baylor. What did you notice about him as a recruit at that point, and what have you seen from him this fall now that he's been healthy, healthier than he was this spring?
Yeah, well, I think he was certainly making progress in the spring and making steps in the right direction. But he's still not quite himself yet. He's getting back, but still not quite there. And so it did set him back. Missing that much time certainly sets anybody back, a big guy especially. And he's like a lot of big linemen that, the bigger you are, typically the longer it takes to develop. It's kind of like a big dog, a Great Dane or a Saint Bernard. They don't look like much for a while, but when they're fully grown and they're developed and they become coordinated, wow, that's an impressive animal, and he's still in that awkward teenage stage a little bit in terms of his body and just learning how to make it all work right. But I like him, and I think he's going to be a really good player for us.
Jeff, you just mentioned those veterans and the trust you have with them. Short time with them, is that tape? Is that time spent? How have you, in this short period of time, been able to develop that trust with those guys?
I don't know. You should ask them that.
Yeah.
I trust them just because I've seen. I guess trust is a two-way street, right? And so I guess from my perspective, I would say I trust them because when I ask them to do something, they do it. And when I challenge them, they step up to the challenge. I trust them because they're just the type of athletes that seem to make the right decision. There are guys that you have to coach into figuring things out. And I'm not saying that's not the case with them to some extent as well, but really good athletes just kind of tend to figure things out on their own most of the time. It just makes sense to them where the open space is, or they recognize the leverage of the defender that's covering them, and they alter a route just a little bit, and it helps them get open. And so I just see those instincts that show up with those guys all the time. And so, yeah, I mean, that trust for me just comes from watching them do their thing repetitively.
Coach Leipold mentioned you were close to having your starting five up front kind of figured out and pieced together. How many offensive linemen right now would you say you have that you feel good about if they had to start a Big 12 game, go up against that level of competition? You would feel good about having them out there, or is that still something that you need to see maybe some more reps, maybe even some live fire in non-conference to feel good one way or another about some of your reserve guys?
Yeah, I would just say the line is still a work in progress. I'll just say that. I don't want to give a specific number. I would just say it's not what we need yet. We've got a couple of guys who do have some experience, but we're also replacing some good players in that line, and learning how to play and how to play together without a guy who really sort of ran the group. I think it's been said probably a few times that missing Nowitzki and the leadership and the communication that he brought is something that we're still trying to find our way with. We're still trying to develop the sort of leadership and communication that we need in that group, and it has not become overly apparent yet how that's gonna take shape.
Coach, would you comment on what it means to have a pair of running backs that are both mature and talented in different ways? Is that a situation where the 1 + 1 equals more than 2 when you got a pair of them like that back there?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's unusual to have one running back on the team that's as good as either of them are. So to have two at the same time is a blessing and a challenge. It's a challenge for me to make sure that we get those guys enough touches. So we'll have times where we got both those guys on the field at the same time, and try to be creative and in creating ways to get the ball to both of them. And then the nice thing is you just feel like you can keep rolling those guys in a game and not feel like either of them are going to get worn down. And in some ways, running back can be the most physical position in football, I think. And so having not only two guys but two big, durable guys is something that gives me a lot of confidence as a play caller.
Coach Wallace was a player at Auburn while you were a coach there. How was your relationship then, and when you were looking at Kansas as a potential job for you, did you talk to Coach Wallace at all?
A little bit. So he was a freshman that my last year there that we brought in really late, just before signing day, and came in as a guy that we kind of signed just because we kind of had to have a guy, and was not real heavily recruited at the time. And so we brought him in and didn't think a whole lot in terms of what he would do for our team early on. And then as we began to work towards the season, we had some other guys who didn't perform as well as we had hoped that they would, guys who were much more heavily recruited and much more highly regarded. And then there was this freshman who was just tough and smart and hardworking, and just showed up and acted like he was supposed to be there every day, and before long worked his way into our starting lineup. And he's the same kind of guy as a coach. And a lot of the play of the running backs, I think, is in part due to his personality. You see that same sort of thing show up from those guys. They play smart, they play tough, and they're responsible. And yes, I did talk with them a little bit about it, and both of us felt like it would be a good fit.
Something Coach Leipold talked about too was your own adaptation process to the practice format that KU does with high intensity. We talked to Bryce Foster about it. He said it was an acclimation process for him. What was it like for you getting used to the practice format, and what were some of the things that maybe you had to tweak from past stops?
So every program is a little bit different in terms of how they practice and how what your schedule is like. All those things really different. And so this one was different than my previous stop and different than the one prior to that as well. And so there's been some getting used to, but I really like what we do. We get a lot done in a shorter amount of time than what has been the case probably at most, if not all, other stops that I've been a part of. And so I'm enjoying that part of it.
Jeff, I was curious, with the analysts and more guys being able to coach, does that free you up to do more stuff than you had in the past?
It does. I enjoy coaching the tight ends. I enjoy having a position room myself. My first stop as a coordinator at BYU, I did not have a position, and it allowed me a little bit more time to work on game planning, scripting, and some of the coordination of the overall offense, being able to roam a little bit in different meetings and individual drills, and sort of oversee the entire process. But I missed being in the meeting room every day with a group of guys and developing a more intimate relationship with a smaller group. And so I still enjoy that and still embrace that. I could probably do a little bit better job of delegating some of those things, and I do some. And we'll hope to do more, but we do have a lot of talented guys on our staff, and those guys certainly make that possible.
I know you guys were kind of moving Logan Brown and Cable Loop back and forth between left and right. I was just curious how that's going.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting, you know, it's really different if you've only played on one side and hadn't spent much time on the other. And both of these guys have spent most of their time on the opposite side than what we've been playing them at here more recently. I think they're getting more comfortable with it, and I think we're in position now where we can make a decision that we think is the best decision based on their capabilities. And you know, another thing you look at when you're looking at an offensive line is who they're playing next to. It's not all just about putting a guy in the best spot. It's also about who's playing next to which guy. And you know, you want to have a guy that's a really good communicator next to a guy that may not be as good a communicator. Maybe sometimes a more experienced guy playing next to a less experienced guy. And so all those things will come together, but I think we're in position now that we can make that decision based on what we feel like is best, not just based on experience.
Anything else for Coach Grimes? Thanks, Coach.
All right.
Thanks, Coach.